Mayor Garcetti, it's very nice to see you.
Thank you, Jay. Great to be with you.
So I talk a lot to people about their journeys, and we will get to your journey forward soon. But talk to me a little bit about growing up. You talk a lot about your multiple identities, and what was your house like growing up?
Well, it's funny. I have probably a singular identity with multiple strands. I think when you're a kid and you don't know anything else, you assume that what you grow up with is what everybody has. Looking back on it, I joke I'm your average Jewish, Mexican, American, Italian. But really, in simplest terms, my father came from a Mexican-American family. Both of his parents spoke Spanish first. His father was an immigrant from Mexico. My mother was Jewish, or is Jewish, from kind of Russia, Poland, Ukraine, Belarus. And both of their parents and grandparents had come at the turn of the 19th to 20th century to Los Angeles in the early 1905 to 19 teens era. And, for me, it was just who I was. I was Jewish. I was Latino. I was an Angelino. I was an American. I think identity is always these rippling circles, concentric circles that are a part of who you are. But it meant, going over to Grandma Juanita and Grandpa Sal's house, Salvador, for menudo. And it would be spending time. My Jewish grandparents were divorced, but to either Grandma Julia's house or Grandpa Harry when I was young, and lox and bagels, and, all the sense that both things were normal and very much who I am. And it's allowed me to be a border crosser. And I say that provocatively, considering all the talk about borders. And I think we as Jews know a lot about crossing borders. But I've never been scared about boundaries or borders. I've kind of loved travel. I've loved living in other places. I've loved navigating culture in a way that when I became mayor of this town, I think made it very easy to look at a town as diverse as ours and feel always at home.
So, but did they ever meet? Did the worlds meet? Was it, I have this vision of a Passover Seder at your house where this multicultural menu and everything else. I mean, did it meet, or was it separate?
No, absolutely. I mean, the holidays we'd have Mexican dishes and Jewish dishes together. The grandparents would be together. It did, but they also kind of coexisted in their own lanes, just like, you have your work life and your home life. I mean, they just existed as two things that were very central to who I am and who I was, and there didn't seem to be a contradiction. It's funny, both sides of the family grew up in Boyle Heights, which when my grandparents grew up there was both very Jewish and very Mexican. People in Los Angeles, many growing up today, don't realize what a Jewish shtetl it was in Boyle Heights. But when I look at it, even though my parents didn't meet there, they kind of grew up on opposite sides of the track in LA. My dad in South LA, my mom in West LA. Their parents must have been on the same streets, passing each other a generation before. And my grandfather, my Mexican grandfather, he got into trouble and hang out with Jews named Bugsy Siegel and Mickey Cohen. It was kind of hanging out with Jewish gangsters. And so when his son was marrying a Jewish daughter, I think he was very excited because he was very comfortable in that culture too. Wasn't as much excitement vice versa, but I think my dad overcame my...
And did you have in your life what I call an aha moment, a Jewish aha moment, where your identity as a Jew came to the forefront?
Not one singular moment, but a number of them. I certainly think traveling... Well, first was I went to Jewish camp between elementary school and junior high school, Gindling Hilltop Camp, when the Wilshire Boulevard Temple camps. And that was... I kind of came in... I come from a very secular Jewish background. My grandparents weren't even very devout. They had a strong sense of being Jewish, but they didn't practice. And my mom, too. So I came in lip-syncing songs at Hilltop and left leading services. So it was the first exposure to the practice of the religious side of Judaism. Second was probably when I was 16 and went to Ethiopia and worked between the two airlifts with Ethiopian Jews and really had a strong sense of how eternal this religion and this culture was, even in its different branches. And then probably throughout high school, passing as somebody thought, most people thought I was just an Italian. I would hear anti-Semitic jokes that people thought they could tell me in private. I'd hear anti-Mexican jokes and, beaner jokes that people would talk about. And, after a couple of years, I would say, oh, I'm Jewish, or, oh, I'm, Latino. but it allowed me again to see both sides of what people sometimes think of Jews in a negative way, but to also understand and embrace it as an insider as well.
I think that people that don't know you don't realize how much time you spend as a parent, as a foster parent and as a parent to Maya, right? So I'm wondering now, as a parent who has parented many children, and it's extraordinary what you and your wife have done, how do you translate your multicultural world, and your Jewish world as a parent?
It's pretty easy. I mean, you have to be conscious about it. You know, things like PJ Library, I signed Maya up for, so she can get a good Jewish education through the books that come each month. Take her to, shul when I can, and invite her to ask questions. I think at the same time, it's also really important to impart the values, not just the practice. So from the earliest age, she's had a tzedakah box. She's, taken that money pretty religiously and given it. She cares a lot about homelessness like her daddy does, and she gives that to organizations. We've tried to expose her to the world as it is and to not sugarcoat it, which I think the temptation for parents is to shield their children's eyes from pain or suffering or challenges. I think you can't do it too deeply, but wherever we can, I want her to have an honest appraisal of this world and the way she can fix it.
So you've made a lot of life choices that led you to where you are today. I'm wondering, if you look back at your life, did you always know you wanted to be in public service?
I think I was either going to be something in the arts or something for sure in social change. I didn't imagine necessarily being an elected official, but I thought I'd be human rights activist or maybe somebody working on issues of international development. I always cared a lot about public policy and the impact that we could make in the world, and I was raised by a father who was a public servant, not for most of his career an elected one, but just a civil servant, and a mother who worked in a charitable foundation as an executive director. So both of them, I think, put forward examples that our highest calling was to serve others. But I always had an artistic bent, so I thought maybe music or acting probably had as equal a shot at one point in my life. Until, I was teaching here and somebody suggested I run for city council, who was the chief of staff to my predecessor. And I dismissed it as a crazy idea. And 3 days later, when I couldn't kind of stop thinking about it, like most things in life, I said, maybe I should check out this road. Somebody's trying to tell me something.
So you're the Jewish mayor, and people call me the mayor of the Jews, right?
So together we got it covered.
And we see each other a lot when we're at events, the same events. And your job, like my job, but even more so, is a 24/7 job. I mean, how does that feel? I mean, it's you're young, with and you really have sacrificed a lot for the city of Los Angeles and for your career. I mean, it must be rough at times not to have the same kind of private life you might have had if you were a pianist or where you were in musical theater.
Right. No, you're exactly right, and you probably know as well. I always joke, it's rabbis, mayors, journalists, get to see everybody, but we're always on call, kind of like a rabbi too. And we always have to deal with people's conflicts and pain. We have to be there for their triumphs. We have to be there for their tragedies. And it is a huge sacrifice. I think from the outside in, people decide who you are as a politician. They either lionize you more than they should, or they denigrate you and dehumanize you much more than they should. Because after all, everybody who's in elected office is a human being with all the potential and all the warts that come with that. For me, it has been a huge sacrifice. You don't evolve a lot individually during your time, certainly being mayor. I'm too busy serving to spend a lot of time reflecting, reading, evolving. Right. But that's okay, because I spent a lot of my life before coming to public service being able to have that sort of education, that sort of exposure. And I do try to just, as often as I can and as difficult as it is, stop everything, come in, have my rabbi maybe talk to me about Talmud, and we kind of discuss the state of the world, have some practice, have some prayer, have some moments where I can punctuate what would otherwise be a giant run-on sentence. I don't even know what weekends are really anymore.
You don't even know what you're doing tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if I ask you. I mean, that's a different way of living.
I don't even know what I'm doing next, probably. I read the schedule every day, but I counted yesterday, I had, I think, 16 things to do. That's a lot to keep in your head. On the flip side, it's an incredible privilege. I mean, I feel so lucky that I can sacrifice some things right now to give to the greater good. I would just, for listeners out there, when you see somebody who's a politician, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure like in any profession, there's ego-driven people who all they care about is the limelight. But most public servants I've ever dealt with have decided to give a lot of themselves, and any of the glamour wears off in about 2 weeks. You know, any of the adoration or the insults you kind of get used to, and about 2 weeks after you're in a new position, it's really about the work. And I don't know any other profession that probably has as many demands for as many days and as many hours in that day.
Right, and you have to remember everybody's name, or at least they want you to remember their name,
right,
even
John?
if you just met them.
I mean, Jay, just kidding.
I mean, there's a lot that people don't understand, and and most of the contacts we both have are people who actually want something from us, as opposed to people who want to help us.
Well, and oftentimes it's very generous things people want. I mean, from just wanting to take a selfie with me, and it can take me a half hour now to move 10 feet in a crowded room because everybody has a camera in their pocket, and I feel always very lucky, and I'm very gracious about that because, you know, it's a moment of touching something for people that their government isn't abstract. On the flip side, when people need your help, you're sometimes their last line of defense. You know, maybe they have talked to everybody in the city, and it's easy to blow them off, but I've always told my staff, listen with an open heart and with open ears, because we may be the difference between whether they're on the street or not, whether they, you know, feel safe or not, or whether they get their problem solved.
So people are always asking you for a favor. So I want to ask you for one right now. So
anything.
Your job is to look at the greatest challenges facing the city of Los Angeles and figure out how to address those challenges. My job is to assess what the greatest challenges are facing the Jewish people here locally and around the world, and I need to be able to address them. So if you were in my job, what would you think the greatest challenge is facing the Jewish people today?
Well, first of all, you've done a great job, I think, bringing together a very disparate people and a disparate city. Jews are spread out and diverse, and Los Angeles is probably the most spread out and diverse city. Put those two together, and it's a tough job to have. And I appreciate what you and the Federation have done to be the glue that holds us together. And I think that gets to the central problem we have as Jews, which is how much to accept our success and just defend ourselves against attacks, or how much should we be of and in the world and accept with an open heart either criticisms or the need for us to stay involved, because we once were that and still are. You know, it's a cliche to say that all Jews are well off. It's wrong to say that every Jew is financially secure. But that said, you know, the things that we know well, partially through our own suffering, are where we need to be involved to solve the problems of today. So it's keeping Jews together and also keeping Jews engaged beyond our own community. It's tough enough to do the first and to have us care for one another sometimes, but we need to do that. And secondarily, to make sure that we are leading, and not just as people who happen to be Jewish, but leading as Jews. You know, I was told by somebody the other day, I was talking in some place out of state, and they said, maybe you shouldn't lead. It was a Jew who said this to my mother, that maybe he shouldn't lead by saying he's the first elected Jewish mayor of Los Angeles. That doesn't read as well in wherever I was. And I kind of reject that. I understand the instinct to hide, or, you know, not everybody loves somebody who's Jewish, but I think we have to be authentic about who we are, and we need to be engaged, and people need to know that how we bring leadership and how we bring engagement as Jews is important for people's perception of all the rest of us too.
I agree. And look, I think that we have multiple identities, as we talked about at the beginning, and I think the fact that you have a lot going on in terms of your family history, and you have a sense of a lot of what Los Angeles and the country needs, because we are many things, and you know, we're becoming more and more many things. I think one of the challenges for the Jewish people is to see there's an opportunity in those that are different from us, right? There's a significant number of Jews of color in our country and in the city. There are a tremendous amount of Jews in the LGBTQ community. There are a tremendous amount of Jews who are not married or in relationship with other Jews. But all of them, if we are able to present the Jewish community and the Jewish people in the right light, will see a value in connecting Jewishly, which to me is what we all ought to be working towards, whether it's in the Jewish community or in fact in the broader community. What used to separate us could easily bring us together, because when we have multiple identities, as more and more people do, we ought to be able to relate to more and more people than we actually do.
Absolutely, and it gets to the core of what Judaism has always been, which is multi-tribal.
Right.
I mean, we're the first people to have many tribes in one, or at least described in history. We're not a civic nation, we're a cultural and religious one, but incredibly diverse within that, and today reflect the entire diversity of this country. Every color, the mixed marriages that are there, which people often talk about as such a threat. Well, I'm the product of it in some weird way. If I had just been the next descendant of my mom's line, it was a very secular, kind of not engaged necessarily with the practice of Judaism, and yet the result of my father and mother's marriage has been, I think, a more focused Judaism for me and my sister's generation. So we shouldn't easily dismiss who we've been, who we are, and who we will be. The challenge is not fighting off that future, but helping guide it.
I agree with you. So I ask people who work for me a question. It's not one of my 4 questions, but
We'll do 5 today.
I'm trying to figure out a way to ask this to you that no one's asked you before.
Okay.
So I ask people that work for me, where are you going to be in 5 years? And I'm not going to ask you why you're visiting near my home state of Massachusetts or why you're traveling a little bit. I want to know, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years?
I know that I'll still be in public service. I don't know that I'll do it my entire life. I mean, the demands of this, and I'm as ambitious about my personal relationships as I am my professional successes, which I think not enough people are. I want to be a superb father to Maya. I want to be, a great husband to Amy. I want to be a good friend to friends I haven't seen in a long time and whom I miss. So, but I do think that I have at least another 5 years in me. Where that puts me, I don't know, because I only have 4.25 years left as mayor if I run out the clock in this last term that I'm in right now. I think as long as I'm still doing something that makes a difference for LA, that could be in LA or that could be elsewhere. And I'm not committed. I think I'll know who I am the day I leave office. My dad said to me the day I got elected to city council, remember who you are today. It's going to be who you are when you leave office. And I've always told people, you're not the title that you have. I mean, I walk around all day and everybody calls me mayor. Or when I'm at my daughter's school, her friends come up and say, you're the mayor, aren't you? And I go, no, I'm Maya's daddy, but my job is the mayor. And I really want Maya and her friends to understand that, because if you don't have a sense of that, I watch too many people in this profession like, oh, I'm out of a job, I'm termed out, I better just stay in some elected position. And I don't think that's the right motivation. If I ever get to that day, I won't run for something. But as long as I still think there are things that drive me and things that I want to fix, and there's a place for me to fix them, I'll keep doing it.
And even in this highly polarized world we're living in now, you still feel that way.
Absolutely, more than ever. I mean, you didn't ask, but it's obviously been reported, and I'm thinking about whether or not to run for president. And the only thing that really guides me on that is my disgust and distrust right now of what's coming from our nation's capital. We're better than this. I just believe that as a Jew. I believe that as a human being. I believe that as a public servant. That public service should be noble. It should bring out the best of us. It shouldn't be finger pointing. It shouldn't be blaming. It should be about uniting. And many listeners may think I'm just talking about our president, but I think there's plenty of blame to go around. We put partisanship before progress. We don't know how to sacrifice. We don't know how to kind of collaborate and bring coalitions together. And, I've understood that power is who you bring together, how you bring them together, and what you're willing to give up in order to move something forward. And I think that is sorely missing right now. So as long as I'm hyper-motivated and believe I have a role and ideas to make a better country, I'll keep plugging away, whether that just means locally or some other position.
I don't know if we don't know how to do it. I feel like people are doubling down on whatever their position and point of view is, right? And they're talking to the people that agree with them. I mean, I'm, having done this podcast now for 6 months, when I have somebody on who's identified as progressive, people attack me. When I have someone, I had Dennis Prager and Frank Luntz as guests, people are attacking me. And first of all, none of those people, I'm convinced, listen to the podcast. but clearly for me, I only want to talk to, if I have to choose between people that agree with me and people I disagree with, I choose people I disagree with because I learn more from the people I disagree with. But I think it's not that we have forgotten; it's that we're choosing not to. Right? We're not choosing not to build coalitions. We're choosing not to work with people who we don't agree with. We're choosing that.
And in doing so, I think we're losing who we are as Americans. We've always been very vigorous about disputing principles, but we've held to principles, and we've also held fast to progress. I just spoke at the largest university in the United States now, Southern New Hampshire University, at their graduation this past weekend. And one of the things I talked to them about was being comfortable navigating borders, to the point that I was saying at the beginning. It's who I am, but go to places that make you uncomfortable. I said, if you don't know somebody from the military, and about 22% of the grads there were military, either vets or current active, I said, go spend some time with somebody who is military. If you are a Trump voter, go talk to a Hillary Clinton voter, and vice versa, or a Bernie voter. If there's a place that makes you uncomfortable, seek it out. And as Americans right now, and because technology allows it, we can just all day long reinforce who we are. But you won't grow as a person, and we won't grow as a nation.
So you referenced you're studying with our friend and one of my podcast guests of the past, Rabbi Sharon Brous. In your studying and everything else, I'm going to ask you a question about a question. If you were able to ask God one question, what would that question be?
That is wonderful. Why did it take us so long to get from Egypt to Israel? It seems like it's a pretty short walk, and we spent years. Because I've always been obsessed with that metaphorically. Like, why were we so lost when I think we knew where we were supposed to go? And yet, to me, that's the great unanswered story and thus metaphor in the Bible. And there's been a lot of theories and answers to it, but isn't that in some ways the metaphor of life? Like, something that should only take us a year or two takes us essentially an entire lifetime to achieve. I think I'd want to know that. And you know, the other central question I think any open-hearted person sometimes asks is, you know, navigate these multiple religions, God. You know, why does it manifest? Why does worship of you manifest itself in such clear but separate philosophical traditions and religious traditions? Each of whom in different ways claim some monopoly on that wisdom and on truth. And yet that conflict is what leads to much of the conflict we've had.
Yeah, I think that we probably have always been wandering, even more than 40 years, and it's maybe only now that we've stopped wandering, and now the question is, how do you live as a people when you're no longer wandering, when the diaspora is frankly your home, unless you live in Israel, which is a whole other set of issues that you have to address as a Jew, where you live and how you live your life. So back to the beginning of the conversation, I blend in the part of me. So there are parts of you that people are close to you know about you, including your fantastic piano playing, and there are parts of me that people are close to me know, which is that I'm a food person and I'm a chef.
Yes.
And so I'm always really interested.
And I have been the recipient of that great chefing.
And we have to do that. We have to do that again soon. But the question I ask people is favorite Jewish food memories. So, you know, given your growing up and everything, do you have a favorite Jewish food memory?
Well, there's two. I'm always obsessed with the perfect chocolate Danish, and when I moved further east in Los Angeles, there wasn't a good place to find one. That's kind of my obsession. And Continental Bakery in the Valley is kind of my favorite right now. But I think my favorite Jewish food memory is probably one nobody's ever said on this podcast, which is in Ethiopia, with a plate full of injera and some different Ethiopian stews. When I was there as a high school student on a medical relief mission with the North American Conference on Ethiopian Jewry, the first airlift had kind of helped those that were the fittest get out of Ethiopia during the famine, so men mostly, and it was left behind as women with children and elders. They had nothing. The medical conditions were horrible, but the hospitality, you know, they have a coffee ceremony that welcomes you to the hut that they have, where they take raw coffee beans and roast them in front of you and crush them and put this thick, sludgy coffee together with this injera of not much, but they had the bread. You eat it with your hands, and you sit, and you're literally around the circle together. And you know, it was a moment of recognizing the eternity of what Jews have done forever, but it's a lot closer than being around a table. It's right there on the ground, communing with, you know, the most elemental part of this earth. And we were a foot or two away from each other and hands simultaneously going into the same meal. It was a pretty magical moment, and one that's stayed with me always.
Yeah, the greatest charitable contribution I've ever made in my entire life is I was in Israel when the plane of Ethiopians got there, and I went to an absorption center, and I bought a case of popsicles for the children. Now, these children had never seen a popsicle before. By the way, I helped an older person learn how to use a doorknob. I mean, that's really, people don't really understand what it was like to go from Ethiopia to Israel. But I bought this case of popsicles and opened it up and and showed the kids how to take it. And then I licked the popsicle. And to see basically 100 Ethiopian kids eat a popsicle for the first time.
Frozen tongues.
It was the most amazing. You know, there'd be one that would just let it, I could see they were just watching it melt in their hands and licking their hands. It was the best, I don't know how much, I might have spent $100. Probably the best $100 charitable contribution I've ever made.
It's a beautiful story.
Look, to be able to experience that as you did, I think these are experiences that inform our lives and inspire us. So as the mayor of Los Angeles, who may run for president, as a public servant who's, you know, been in the city council and really served this community, what are the 2 or 3 things that you care about, that you want to make a difference at?
There's no question that right now, I think California, the West Coast, even other cities like Washington, D.C., we've seen an explosion in homelessness connected with some places high rents, the cheapness and availability of drugs and addiction. That kind of swirls about in this toxic brew that is the only thing that really holds the city back. I mean, we have the Olympics coming in 10 years, record investment, more visitors, more construction, more port containers, you know, all these levels of things, more jobs than we've ever had. And yet to see people on the streets and to have my daughter ask, is that normal, breaks my heart. And yet I've seen that heart in this city also, while it's broken, grow bigger than I've ever seen it before. And I really do have tremendous hope that 2 measures voters passed will allow us to end homelessness in this decade that's ahead of us. I think the other thing is making sure that a rising economy brings everybody along with it. You know, we can't have the disparity of wealth, and I'm not an anti-capitalist, anti-wealth kind of guy. I think those are great, and we've promoted capitalism, and I'm glad that we have people who are of means in the city. But we have to ensure that we don't just attract great talent to Los Angeles. We have to grow it up right here. Because my family is an example of both. My father was the son of a dreamer who had a 7th grade education, became a citizen after he fought in World War II for this country. And my mom, you know, was the daughter of a man who went from a modest tailor to the President of the United States, President Johnson, and had a company that he built here in town. But it was a union shop while he made men's suits. And there was always a sense you give back. And in this country, it's kind of, what's the quickest way to get the stock price up? Get your bonus. Maybe somebody else is running the company in a few years. Banks have consolidated so much. There's not the local savings and loans who are profitable, but profitability wasn't their God. So how do we get access to capital, access to skills, a decent education? Those things that allowed me to sit in this office here today because they were there in America are probably, you know, the biggest things that consume me now, housing our homeless and giving everybody opportunity.
So I end my podcast with a kind of a lightning round, either or questions.
Sounds good.
You can comment, but it's, you know, you have to make a choice.
Go quick.
All right, I'll go easy at first. Jazz or classical music?
Jazz.
Okay. Chili rellenos or matzo brie?
Matzo brie. Love Mexican food, but chili rellenos aren't my favorite.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I picked the wrong.
If it said chorizo or matzo brie, chorizo. Even over, hate to say it, smoked salmon.
All right. Well, I was going to ask a lox gefilte fish question, but I won't go there.
Lox for sure.
All right. Silver Lake or Hancock Park?
Silver Lake.
Even though you're living in Hancock Park right now.
Beautiful community walk-in. I miss the hills. I miss the the Silver Lake Reservoir.
Okay. All right. I end my podcast. You kind of alluded to it before with your Danish conversation, but I end the podcast always the same way. Probably the hardest question. Babka or Rugula?
Rugula, for sure.
That's great. Mayor Garcetti, thank you very much.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
I look forward to continuing our conversations, and I look forward to finding out what you will be doing over the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay, so much.